Time for our first session of the day. Do remember, we would love it. I've got my little iPad here, so if you want to submit questions, if you are watching us online, that's the way to do it. You can join online or using Circle. And just remember to use the RSA Fellows hashtag. That's really helpful. Since the RSA began in 1754, it has always promoted and supported the creative arts. In more recent times, we've got used, haven't we, to thinking about art, science and technology combined as our creative industries. The UK is in a really strong position here. Our creative industries contribute around 6% of our total economy. They employ 2.3 million of us. And they export more than £50 billion of goods and services every single year. There is concern that growth could stall without proper investment. So we're going to talk about how we tackle that. What next for creativity in this country? And the theme throughout the day, what's going right, what could go right? So to answer those questions, and some of yours too, I'm sure, today's panel, on stage with me, Katy Shaw. Hi, Katy.
Hi.
Katy is the director of the Arts and Humanities Research Council Creative Communities Programme. Also with us, Darren Henley. Darren is Chief Executive of Arts Council England. And online, I hope, we're joined, yes, by Shanaz Gulzar. Shanaz is the Creative Director of Bradford 2025, which is the organisation set up to deliver the UK's City of Culture in 2 years' time. Shanaz is actually in Poland, and we'll find out why in just a moment. Please, though, welcome our panel. Each of the panelists is going to talk in turn for a few minutes first about what could go right, what is going right. Katy, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Well, I think I'd just echo our first speaker in that it's just such a refreshing question in a world of constant bad news. And I was saying to a colleague earlier, I read Andy and Tracy's really good piece in the new issue of the RSA Journal last night when I was doom scrolling through the internet. And the only thing that made me stop was the idea that this article offered hope. And what I'm going to talk about today is a source of hope for me, I think, and for all of us, which is our cultural and creative industries. And from the top, I'd like to think of it in those terms. Quite often, you might have seen in the sector vision and elsewhere, we talk about just CIs, the creative industries. It's actually the cultural and creative industries that are key to all of this. Culture underpins that ecosystem. And I'm, as you can probably tell from my very flat vowels, not from around here. I'm from Newcastle in the north of England. And Newcastle was famous historically for powering the last industrial revolution through coal. And what I'm proposing to us today is that culture and creativity is the coal of the contemporary. It is a massive seam that runs under our devolved nations and our regions and our centres. And that if we leave it untapped, we will really not fulfil our potential, I think, as a generation and as a country, particularly in terms of our soft power in the world. And because I think I have about 8 minutes today, I thought I was going to pitch 8 areas where I think we have sources for hope and little pegs we can hang on to. And the first one, as you've just seen from our speaker, is next generation talent, right? The next generation has so much talent and creativity, but currently we're kind of relying on that as an innate potential. What we need is a creative education plan that has a coherent creative curriculum from early years to HE to CPD and returners. Because we all know people who work in professions that are aligned to our cultural and creative industries that could make a massive contribution to them, that could be innovating in them. So how do we help bring those people in? And how do we help see where the skills gaps are and also where the skills strengths are for role modelling? And role modelling brings me on to representation. You know, as somebody who wrote an inquiry report for an APPG into cultural recovery post-COVID, we said then, and I will say now, EDI will get kicked to the curb post-COVID, as there are other priorities. A cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, it cannot become a nice to have, okay? Representation is an economic necessity as much as it is a social good. If you think about the creative industries, they tell stories about who we are, both as a nation and as sectors. And we need more diverse stories, but to achieve that, we ultimately need more diverse storytellers as well. And that means thinking about who leads these industries. There's a lack of diversity in leadership, and also there's a lack of leadership. If we look at our creative industries, there's a huge potential for new middle management roles, for new leadership roles, and for supporting leaders in our creative industries. Because quite often you have people running art galleries who are absolute experts in art, but they might not necessarily have an MBA, and why would they? Why would we assume that they would? So how can we better support them to role model their next generation of creatives through. And for me, and this is probably no surprise, working with a Creative Communities programme across the UK that is centred on partnership working, prosperity partnerships are key to all of this. And there's real hope that lies in this model of delivery. The Creative Communities programme is a major investment from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and it's deliberately designed to look at what happens when you bring academics, non-academics, and communities together around a shared opportunity to create new culture. And there's examples of this going on all across the UK in lots of different ways. And if we think about particularly the devolved context of this delivery, it's fascinating and inspiring. You know, England has its own laws, but when we think about Wales and things like the Future Generations Act and what's going on there, Northern Ireland with their One Island culture policy, the way we are breaking down borders and trying to show culture for what it is, a connector, and something that helps us reflect on what it means to be human. And that often requires technology. I think technology is a real source of hope for the cultural and creative industries, but we also need to be really mindful of digital exclusion and digital poverty. For those of you watching today, it's brilliant in terms of being able to bring more people into the room than we can physically. But we already know this year that 4 million people in the UK have had to cancel their broadband because of the cost of living crisis. So what's that doing for culture online? What's that doing for democracy? And what's that doing for civil society? And this is ultimately because culture is often called soft infrastructure, which obviously bugs me for many reasons. But if it is, then guess what? Soft infrastructure needs hard infrastructure to deliver properly. So if we are going to invest in these brilliant new flagship projects like Shakespeare North, like the Eden Project in Morecambe, they are pointless if we can't get to them with transport, if people can't supply them, if they are not connected as part of a national infrastructure. So that hard infrastructure is equally as important. We have the potential there to connect up funding streams to make sure that we're working smart around creative industries investment. And finally, I think we need better policy making, and policy making is a source of huge optimism for me. You know, I've been really lucky to be part of the APPG inquiry, the Local Government Culture Commission, Gordon Brown's Union Commission. All of these movements are thinking about culture at core, how we think about the future through culture. But we also have a real need for more cultural policymakers and more cultural economists. We need to train that next generation of people who can help land some of these messages more effectively with government and policy making. Because just to finish up, all of the challenges and opportunities you're going to hear about today are not opportunities that can be tackled in isolation. No government can face up to these opportunities in isolation, and no organisation, not even the RSA, can solve these things in isolation. It's going to take collaboration. And collaboration often isn't easy. You know, we are all measured by systems that encourage us to compete, whether that is university league tables if someone like me, or bidding into central funding pots, or even things like the classroom at school where you're graded individually. I think we need to pivot the way we think about opportunity as being one of collaboration, not competition, because ultimately innovation means nothing if we can't collaborate around it and communicate it.
Katy, thank you so much. Darren, would you like to take your 8 minutes?
I would, thank you very much. And what a fantastic start from Katy there, who set out things so well. I also share that sense of optimism in the title that we've been given today. One of the things I did during lockdown was I became very interested in positive psychology, and I ended up doing a degree in it. So positive psychology is the science of what makes life worth living. So I think it is really, really important that we take that positive view of the world. And there's so much good that actually is going on, and we recognise that and celebrate it. There's lots of things that we need to do better at, but I think it is important that sometimes as a country we can be a little bit reticent to celebrate some of the good things that we do and that we do achieve. I've got four areas I was going to touch on, and some of them slightly overlap, but one of them slightly overlaps, so I'll probably shorten that one. For me, happiness there is no greater reason to invest public money. We at the Arts Council invest taxpayers' money and National Lottery players' money, and I believe we do that to create happier lives in villages, towns and cities up and down this country. That's the reason that we do that. We don't do it ourselves, but we invest in other people, in individuals, creators and artists and cultural organisations that change people's lives in those places. And that sort of question and relationship between happiness and public policy isn't something that's new. It goes way back in time. But I think that increasing the happiness of individuals and communities is a really deep and significant challenge. And I think it's particularly still necessary as we sit there in a post-pandemic world as well. I think, you know, there's a lot of things we need to do. A lot of things changed in people's lives that we need to make some interventions that help them to be happy again. And I just think of some of the things around young people who, you know, have grown up with a set of experiences, whether they were toddlers or at school, which actually for 3 years of their lives were radically different from what we experienced. And I think there was a deficit there in their lives. And how can we make sure we correct that deficit? But I think this is a positive thing that we can do. And you know, one of the smallest countries in the world, Bhutan, has led the way in this, and happiness is massive there. But New Zealand has actually done a lot of work on this. And David Attenborough, he was very good looking at New Zealand. He commended them as a country for putting people and planet over profit alone. And I think that ties in a lot with the thinking that's happening from the RSA at the moment. But there are a lot of other people. Just a couple of weeks ago, Lord Richard Layard was here launching his new book around well-being, and he's been, you know, a tireless advocate for investing in happiness. And he makes the very bold assertion, which I agree with, which is the aim of public policy should be to maximise people's happiness. And there's other people, other great names from you know, Lord Gus O'Donnell, the LSE Vice Chancellor, Baroness Manoush Shafik. They've all spoken in a similar vein. And I think it's something we need to be able to talk about and measure. And it's great having Andy here because obviously he knows how to talk treasury, and that's a very important thing when you work in doing the job I do. And you know, there's a suggestion of a measure like the WellBe, which is actually a measure that measures 1 unit of life satisfaction on a 0 to 10 scale for one person for 1 year, and it's based on something that's used in healthcare called the Qualia. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to have so we can actually start to measure it. It's not soft, it's not unnecessary, it's not a nice to have on the side. It's something that's actually a really important part of being human beings. And as I say, at the Arts Council, I believe that what we're there to do is to create happier lives. And I suppose 3 areas I'm quite interested in that where I believe that happiness policies might benefit us. One is about reducing inequality, and I think that's really, really important because you know, there is a real unfairness, and we need to tackle that unfairness, and we need people to have opportunity wherever they are, particularly geographically within the country. I think the work that we do in this area can improve well-being, and that's particularly around mental health, and I know that there's some real challenges there for young people, and anybody who has young people in their lives as children or grandchildren will know that this is a real issue, and probably technology has not helped that, but certainly also being locked down for 3 years probably didn't help it either. And also that sense of building community, and we know lots of things around volunteering, around being in spaces together, having that communal experience is really important. So for me, that's one of the things that you know, could go. It's starting to go right in some places, but could go even more right in others. Place, I've talked about, and place I think is a really important thing. And at the Arts Council, we have a 10-year strategy called Let's Create, which is about taking enabling everybody wherever they live in the country to have their own creativity celebrated, to be able to live creative lives, and also to have the best work being made co-curated with them, but also brought to them, so that it's happening on their doorstep. So there's not just one place in the country where you get things, it's happening all over the country. And that's about making more chances for people and giving them the opportunity to have more choices, to be able to take part in the best creative activity and enjoy and learn from and take part in those cultural experiences. And I think also we need people to be able to have a greater say in what creative activities and cultural experiences are available closer to them as well. And we have a programme called Creative People and Places. We have 39 of these across the country in places like Batley and Blackpool and the Black Country, and places that don't start with B as well. So far, more than 8 million people have taken part in those activities. And I was with them down in Bridgewater, actually in Somerset, also starts with a B, I just realised, just this week. And it was really interesting bringing that creative practice together and actually showing people the opportunities of what they could have, but then letting them choose what they can do. And it's really, really important to see that work. And we're working hard to make those opportunities available to people. And we've seen a big investment in what we've called our priority places across the country. So we've just launched a new national portfolio, 275 new cultural organisations being funded regularly for 3 years. I was in Leicester last week, and I sat around the table. There's 7 new national portfolio organisations there, £4.3 million investment over the next 3 years in those organisations. And it's really interesting to see how that money is now touching communities and involving people who probably, in fairness, have been underserved by public investment in culture for decades. So it's really, really important that. So again, another thing that's going right. And I suppose that the final thing from me would just be to echo that sense that we know that talent is absolutely everywhere in this country, but opportunity is not. I think that's something that, for me, is really, really important. It's something that the Arts Council, we've thought long and hard about. And we want to be able to ensure that somebody can be born in a place, can have a really good education experience in that place, a rich experience, and then could find a way of working in the creative and cultural industries in that place as well, without having to go to another part of the country to achieve that. And, you know, some of the work that, I don't know, again, Andy was very influential in the Levelling Up white paper, but some of the work there that has an opportunity for it to happen, I think it is really, really important. And we at the Arts Council are doing what we can to make that happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Darren. We're going to talk about another place that begins with B, because Shanaz Gulzar joins us now to talk, in part, obviously, about her work as Creative Director of Bradford 2025, but you join us from Poland. Why?
I'm in Łódź, another post-industrial textile city in Poland, which has lots of connections with Bradford, but it's also the Photo Festival, which is an international photo festival that is celebrated here in Łódź. And if anybody knows Łódź, you know that it has a real history in cinematography, photography, and kind of putting culture at the heart of creating change in this fantastic city, in this brilliant, beautiful country. So that's why I'm here.
And from Poland, why don't you tell us a little bit, Shanaz, first, before we take questions, coming back to the theme for the whole day, about what you think can go right in terms of unlocking the potential of the creative industries?
Well, all the speakers before me said it absolutely beautifully, and I feel like I'm just going to mirror a lot of what they say, but I'm going to start with a quote. And that quote is from Ikra. She's an 11-year-old girl from Bradford, and this quote led our bid. And her quote is, "I come from hope. I come from Bradford." And I feel like that underlines what all of our speakers have said just before me. In Bradford, during our bid, we did a heart and minds on ourselves. We reminded ourselves of our creativity. We reminded ourselves of our inventive spirit. And most crucially of all, we reminded ourselves that we all have a right to our imagination. During our bid, also in 2021, Bradford Council launched Culture is Our Plan, which is a 10-year strategy. 2025 happens in the middle of that 10-year strategy, and they've put culture and creativity at the heart of both social and economic regeneration of that city and district. Bradford City of Culture is not just a citywide bid, it's very different to the other cities of culture before us, it's city and district. That's 144 square miles. That's 67% rural. So we are putting people, place, creativity together with Planet and saying, bring it all together. What is it that we can do? What is the opportunity within the challenges that we face? During the bid, we kind of came up with 4 themes. And one of those themes is coming of age. And it feels like this is Bradford's coming of age. For a city that is post-industrial, and for those of you in the room who don't know, at one point, Bradford produced 2/3 of the world's wool. And apparently had more Rolls Royces in Bradford than anywhere else in the world. So I'm still kind of chasing that fact down. And for that to be its history and kind of looking where we are now, and for people like my parents came to Bradford, came to this brilliant, beautiful district, because that industry is what invited them here, because those jobs, those mills, is what helped us make home here. So coming of age, this is Bradford's coming of age. But we're also, 26.3% of our population is under 18. We are also the home of Born in Bradford, the only longitudinal study following 30,000 young people from birth to adulthood. And just to say, somebody must have had a brilliant idea that we were definitely going to win UK City of Culture for 2025, because the first cohort turned 18 in 2025. I absolutely love that coincidence, and it gives me huge opportunity as creative director. But we're putting young people at the heart of it. We're putting the kind of coming of age of Bradford at the heart of it. We're also not saying to our young people, you need to have everything figured out at 18. If I was in the room, I'd ask everyone in the room, how many of us all believe that we've come of age? And I'd ask for hands, please. But obviously, I'm not there. So I'm just going to put that kind of thought into your mind. And the idea that we have a particular age that we come of age at, no, life is a journey. Therefore, we are continuously coming of age. There are different moments in our lives where we come of age for different reasons. So we're looking at supporting our young people to lead our city of culture, to help deliver this kind of strand for us, this foundation of our theme, of our city of culture. We're a city of the world. Not just what we gave to the world as industry and invention and innovation as part of the textile trade, but also what is happening in the city and district right now. We are discovering just some of the invention and innovation that is happening as a result of we still do wool. You know, the British wool are actually based in Bradford. So all of the kind of the coding for wool is in Bradford. That's a co-op that is owned by farmers. This is discovery that we are doing as part of City of Culture. It's our communities, our history, but it's also our young people. When you're a city of the world, what is it that you offer back to locally, nationally, and internationally? We're also a city of invention and innovation. Earlier this year, I was at the RSA's President's Lecture where Sir Peter Bazalgette said, steam powered one revolution, steam is powering another revolution. That's science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. We talk about Bradford. In Bradford, we are talking about steam powered, that everything is connected, that it's not either or, it's and. Put the arts back into the STEM, make it STEAM, put the arts back into the curriculum, give our young people the critical skills, the right to their imagination, the kind of critical thinking that we all need. We don't know the problems that are actually going to come to us. Look at Maya. You know, she was 11 years old when she first started her kind of campaigning, her activism. That's what I mean. Give our young people the right to their imagination. That is what we are trying to do. How can we not, as a quarter of the population is under 18? To bring STEAM, bring art, bring it back into the curriculum. And finally, it's interesting that Katy talked about connectivity and the fact that, you know, we have the Eden Project in Morecambe and that we've got Bradford UK City of Culture and that connectivity across the country. And it's really easy to celebrate beauty and it's really easy to celebrate imagination, but it's hard within our challenges to find those opportunities. And Bradford has some amazing, beautiful architecture, but we also have the Bradford Interchange. And if anybody's travelled to Bradford Interchange, it's not the most beautiful piece of architecture on the planet. And someone must have thought the same thing because they scrawled on it. And this is typical Bradford. This is typical of how we are approaching our city of culture. It is typical of how we are trying to give access to the cultural sector to those young people who don't have the traditional routes into the education sector, who don't have the traditional routes into our sector, who don't know what it means to be an artist, to be a technician, to be a director, to be a producer, to be, you know, an arts administrator. How do we demystify our sector? And this quote that someone must have scrawled on the side of a wall, and it's there as you come into the magnificent, not so magnificent interchange, is "Welcome home, sexy." That's our fourth theme. That's our invitation. That's our DNA. We're the city of the Brontes. We're the district of David Hockney. You know, how can we have created such amazing, fantastic artists? The Bronte sisters published at a time where women weren't publishing books. So what they did, they subverted. That's what we do. They went kind of thought, okay, we're writers, we're authors, we want to be published, so we're going to play the system a little bit. That's what we do. That's what artists do. That's what creatives do. Our vision for Bradford is to put amazing, inspiring, extraordinary ideas led by inspirational artists, delivered with, in partnership with, and by creative communities. We need a diversity of voices in our sector. We need to be able to tell our stories with fresh approaches and fresh views. Change and transformation doesn't happen because we're comfortable. It happens because we need it. So I want to finish with a quote from Rebecca Solnit, would you believe? So it's really fantastic to hear that she's going to be here later on for this lecture. And it's similar lines with Icarus' quote, actually. And Rebecca says, hope demands action, and action isn't possible without hope. And that's why we won the next UK City of Culture, because the opportunity for it to be truly of Bradford, within the context of Bradford, within the context of where we find ourselves socially and economically within the UK, and actually within the context of our young people, we won the next City of Culture, and that is our approach to delivering it. So it's 1 year, but we are using that year to drive the next 10 years of change for our city and our district. And my invitation to everybody in this room is come with us on that journey. Come and see us, not just in 2025, but in 23, in 25, 26, 27 and onwards. Join us in that year, but also join us beyond that year.
Wonderful. Three great speeches. We've got about 20 minutes or so left with this panel, and I would love for you to ask some questions. I just want these guys to talk to each other and share some thoughts, because there was so much cross-pollination with those speeches there, and I've already seen a first-hand, so you can have the first question. We'll get a mic to you in just a moment. So much conversation there was about young people. And I love this idea of STEM becoming STEAM. Can I go back to you? That came from Shanaz, but Katy, at the beginning, you were talking about a creative education plan. What do you mean by that?
So the government currently is developing a cultural education plan which is attempting to do some of this join-up work from early years on. But it's starting at a really difficult time. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge, like many of the issues I'm sure we'll discuss today. We're seeing a bit of a talent pipeline issue when it comes to the next generation of creatives at the moment, because we have a generation who, first of all, as Darren alluded to, have only ever really known a cycle of crises, you know, largely born in the wake of 9/11, and then a war, and then a financial crash, and then a pandemic, and then Brexit, and. So they've never really known a time of optimism in the way some of us might have done previously. And if you map that back onto their education, there were quite fundamental changes made to some really important elements of the curriculum, like English, for example, that really steamrolled over diversity, steamrolled over assessment methods. And so when we were getting students from GCSEs and A-levels to university, when I met them for the first time, they weren't used to reading books from different cultures or hearing different voices. You know, we almost reverted back to the dead white male model of literature at GCSE and A-level.
You personally fought to change that, and haven't you?
So yeah, through the English Association, I'm on the board of, we did petition and lobby the DFE, and they were responsive. AQA and other examples were very responsive to try and diversify some of the texts. But it still remains the case that they often arrive at university trained in how to do exams, and more importantly, like, you know, students will today, spending up to 3 years on one book. You know, they'll start Christmas Carol at year 9 for their exam in year 11. Nobody, I mean, I wouldn't want to read a book for 3 years, and I'm a professor of literature. It kills the joy. And it kills the creativity. And we need to think about how we re-inject creativity into assessment as well as into skills training. And also how we think about training our graduates for a future that is utterly uncertain. And the one future-proof and AI-proof skill actually is creativity and critical thinking. And that's where I think a lot of the curricula needs to be heading.
Darren, do you want to come in on this? You talked about talent is everywhere and opportunity is not. How do we convince a younger generation that, I mean, it's much, I don't know where this came from first, but you hear it over and over again. If you can see it, you can be it. And if these industries are available where they live, then there will be a sense of being able to pursue that from a young age. Is that what you dream of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. I think just to echo some of the more school-based and education-based, I did a report for government in 2012, which talked about the importance of cultural education for every young person. So subjects in school like art and design, dance, drama, music, I think they should be there right the way through the curriculum and available to people. It's important they're there as curriculum subjects, so they're not just a nice-to-have add-on. And I think when you look at a sort of grid of how a young person works, there's in school, there's out of school, there's formal and there's informal learning, and I think all of those are very, very important. Doing my job, I spend about half of every week travelling around the country, and one of the things I've observed is that independent schools tend to advertise on railway station posters. So I've looked at all of those posters, and it's really interesting. They don't advertise about the quality of their maths lessons or their geography lessons. They talk about the sport, the art, the drama, and the music, and I think that's really interesting, because if you're going to make that decision to put your child, the young person in your life through independent education, that's a very, very hefty financial decision you're going to make for a decade or so. That's clearly where the market is, and that's what those schools are marketing themselves on. So I think that's really interesting. I believe everybody in this country should have a place at the table and be able to have a conversation and take part in conversations. If you don't have the wherewithal and the cultural capital, that's much harder to do, and I think that's my challenge there. So I believe everybody, wherever you grow up in the country, whatever school you go to, you should have access to that cultural capital, and then more people from more different places will be in rooms like this, and that's a really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. One more quick thread across our panellists before we take a question from the floor. You've talked about, I really want to bring Shanaz in on this, because you've got a really interesting bid underway already, haven't you, for an architectural project to create a peripatetic venue that will travel around presumably the city and the wider district. And I bring in this idea, it's a really simple one, of how people get to cultural events and get home again late at night, which isn't always possible, which stops people going. Tell us a little bit about the venue that you're hoping to create, Shanaz.
Well, in Bradford, when I mentioned earlier, it's 144 square miles. So when you're a district-wide bid, you have a responsibility to every corner of that district. You have a responsibility to ensure that people, as you said, can come be a part of and be in those spaces, be in those venues, and actually, to some extent, program them as well, because we are going to put young people kind of leading those. And we were very, very aware of some of the kind of the transport kind of issues within our district. So trying to make it accessible. We talk about accessibility and inclusivity. So you've got to put, your money where your statements have been. And the beacon, which we're calling it beacon, which is both a light and invitation to communities, but it's also an invitation to architects. We're living through a really a kind of crucial moment in human kind of history right now, in human evolution, because what we are facing through climate and environment, we have to look at everything that we're doing. So this venue is a challenge to our architects and to our designers to try and create something that is climate friendly, environmentally friendly, working with first, second, third generation recycled, upcycled materials, and telling the truth of that, which also brings extraordinary imaginative solutions to people. So they don't have to travel hundreds of miles to see something. Actually, it's in their backyard. It's in their parks. It's in their streets. So they can engage with extraordinary and fantastic because it's their right to. And that's how we're trying to approach it, because everyone has a right to great art. Everyone has a right to great ideas, and communities are creative. So it's about giving them that access. So when you are a district-wide city of culture, I think it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility, and we couldn't not do otherwise.
That's the beacon. That is taking a venue. You've got to build a venue and then take it to all the places, and I'm sure it'll have a life beyond 2025 as well. We were talking before we came out about something very prosaic, but it's simply about people being able to get to venues and home again, and transport. Katy, what's the message here that you want to take to policymakers about infrastructure?
Well, I think it was precisely that soft infrastructure needs hard infrastructure. They absolutely are part of the same ecosystem of experience. And there's some interesting work going on at the moment with the AHRC about how you evaluate the contribution of certain cultural venues, for example, a project called Culture Heritage Capital. And the idea that even if you live in this town, a city or city region and have something like an art gallery or a museum on your doorstep and you never use it at all, that venue has a non-use value to you as well, because it brings a quality of life, it brings things to your neighbourhood, it's an asset. Now, how do we measure the impact of that asset is a very different question, but the fact it's there is really important. And for people who do have connectivity issues due to hard infrastructure, then what is the value of having a venue that you cannot get to? And then when that's compounded by digital disconnectivity too, and we saw that a lot in the pandemic, particularly, you know, it wasn't all kind of box sets and banana bread for everybody. A lot of it was quite profound isolation as a result of what was going on. We've seen some really interesting interventions like the National Theatre. If you can't get to the National Theatre, guess what? You've got NT Live now in your local cinema, or you can subscribe online, but you can only do that if you aren't digitally excluded. So we have to think about, for policymakers, what about culture as a fundamental human right? What about internet access as a fundamental citizen's right in the UK? And where we are in the electoral cycle, I think this is a really good time for policymakers on both sides of the spectrum to be really brave about the creative industries, because it's quite rare at the moment as a country we can point to stuff and be like, yeah, we're the best in the world at that actually. And we are. So like, if we're not going to plant a flag in that now, then we never will.
Darren, you travel the country every week. You're on the road a lot of the time. What are your thoughts about improving the capacity for people to get to the venues and get home again?
And it is the getting home again that actually is the crucial thing. And maybe, you know, it's a room where many ideas have been born. Maybe the RSA culture bus is the idea that comes out of this today, you know, because actually it's a very simple idea, but for many people in many parts of the country, some of them in very rural areas, but actually people around the edges of big cities, they just can't get home. So if you, in the same way as when we've talked about young people and work experience, for example, if you pay their fare and you give them lunch, they can have that work experience. And maybe there's something here we should say that actually, if you bought a ticket or you have a ticket, you can give out as many free tickets as you want, but if someone can't get there and get home, there's a problem. Maybe there's some sort of transport that's wrapped into that. Maybe it's something we could be thinking about in Bradford. You know, there's some exciting opportunities.
It is worth saying as well, just to put the point in from the north, that several of our venues north of Tyne in Newcastle, if you buy a metro ticket, you get, if you buy a theatre ticket, you get free metro ride to and from the theatre, and I know that's the case for a lot of other venues. They're very simple levers you can pull to make people leave their car at home, do the environmental piece, but also get people to and from venues safely and make sure those mass transport systems speak to the culture sector as well.
Thank you all for talking to each other about some of the threads that came out. We'll come back for one general conversational point at the end, but I'm really keen that people in the room and at home as well get a chance to ask the panellists some questions. You had your hand up very... The gentleman who is already holding the microphone because we're ahead of the curve. Would you like to answer a question, and do you want to direct it to everybody on the panel or someone in particular?
Could I start it with Katy, but for the others to come in? Bobby Kennedy in 1968 famously said, "The youth of our nation are the pillars of our performance." And for me, that resonates with what each of you have said. And also the fact that we've had 17 education secretaries since Tim Robinson's report in 1999. So if purely theoretically one was writing, or hypothetically one was writing a creative curriculum, should one direct it to the government or should one direct it elsewhere and not to guerrilla?
Should we Trojan horse it? I think anything productive will be done hand in hand and will be done cross-party and cross-sector. The beauty of the creative industries, and again, the opportunity, is that they cross all sectors, right? And it's often educating students and the next generation in the opportunities that lie in the creative industries that they may think are not on their horizon at all. So, for example, at the moment, we're working with a big studio development in Sunderland who are going to need, guess what, joiners and hairdressers, as well as producers and directors. We worked with Hachette, the biggest publisher in the world, to open up their offices in the regions and nations and help them grow the next talent pipeline of publishing staff in the regions and nations, not just in London. But that means going into our business and law graduates and being like, there's a job for you here in publishing, as well as our graphic design students. So it's about how we diversify the workforce across the board and help them have paths into creativity. But if we want to land this stuff, then we really need to embed the policymakers from the beginning, because it's about educating them. And why would they be across this stuff? They can't be across everything, but we need better messaging and better pathways to communicate it in. And I do think another huge source of optimism is devolution. You know, all of our combined authorities and our devolved nations are developing their own culture strategies, their own culture plans, hopefully trailblazer deals to deliver culture and to generate cultural income as well through things like hotel taxes, which could be retained and ploughed in. So I think Devo offers us real hope to deliver that as well.
Darren, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, can I just, a very practical thing to build on that. I guess the people in this room are probably very culturally literate and care about culture. One thing that everybody can do is to become a school governor, because actually the school governors are the people who hire the head teachers, and if you hire the right head teacher, they will see culture as being important in their school. And there's something that everyone can do, and you could do it individually, and all those people you work with or also have shared values, and we could make a revolution happen, and no one would notice. Except everyone will notice ultimately.
Genuinely much more fulfilling than you might think from the public press.
Are you a school governor?
Yes.
Good man yourself. Let's pass the microphone, gentleman in the front, and then you can pass it back to the lady behind you in the black top. Who would you like to address your question to?
Everybody.
Why don't we start with Shanaz with it? Shanaz, can you hear the microphone questions okay?
I can now, thank you.
Brilliant.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks. So I'm Dr. Mota Hussain. I'm a senior lecturer in environmental architecture in Sheffield Hallam University. So I live in London, but work in Sheffield. So just my point is that what do you think about the idea of why not we have more collaboration between primary, secondary school and universities? I give you a context. I work with the housing society to improve the community for climate resilient. And I work with Great Place. And they asked me, why not we, from the university, invite the students from the school, come to the university and teach about what is the environmental architecture is in their way, how important it is to understand. Because the problem is that their problem comes from a very deprived community, and they don't feel like to go to the university at all. And what about this kind of small steps can make a big difference to them? They're thinking, they feel like, no, they're going to go to the university. They want to do something good, better. What do you think about this collaboration between university and the schools?
Shanaz, would you like to answer that first?
Yes, of course. That's really interesting because it goes to that point, you have to see it to be it. We are looking at bringing actually primary schools and secondary schools together underneath, working together to kind of create play and playful areas, and that acknowledgement that you, when you're younger, you can kind of, your dreams are bigger, and when you go into secondary school, it's immediately as you start kind of getting funneled and start thinking about your GCSEs, your dreams start to become more focused around, or as I kind of sometimes see, you stop dreaming about the other thing you could be and you start dreaming about what you think you should be. And I think your point about bringing universities, secondary schools, primary schools together is to see, you have to see it to be it. And I think it's more than that as well. I think it's actually bringing artists, creatives, thinkers, doers, makers together and to demonstrate to young people that you can come from all diverse backgrounds and you can find your way and find your route into higher education or into fantastic careers, fantastic opportunity, and it's not always through traditional methods.
Thank you, Shanaz. I'm going to go straight to another question so we can get through as many as we can because we've only got a couple of minutes left. So go for it.
It's Jan Douglas. First of all, thank you, panel. I mean, it's been exciting and really enlightening, so I'm very grateful to you for that. I work with quite a lot of women's charities, and the whole idea about having sort of accessibility to cultural events, the big issue they have is the safety element of coming home late. And that's, you know, not surprisingly, particularly in the South, has come up more and more. And it'd be quite interesting to hear anyone on the panel's view about how we can sort of try and meet that challenge, if you like, and if there are any people that you regard as role models or organisations as role models who are actually doing that to sort of keep women safe in particular in these late night venues. Thank
Katy,
you.
do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can pick up. So where I'm based in the northeast, we have a police and crime commissioner, a female police and crime commissioner, who is also interestingly standing as a candidate to be mayor, who wants to embed culture and transport to address precisely the issues we were talking about, but also has pointed out that in a lot of the Devo deals for transport, safety for women and for other groups, there's not even part of that, and there's no budget for it. So as PCC, she's apportioned some of her budget to that. So now there's officers on the metros after a certain time at night, and there's a free taxi number for any woman in the city centre who has struggles to get home after a night out for whatever reason, because sometimes you can't get an Uber, you can't get a cab even if you want one and you can afford one to get home. So on certain mega events, and we are lucky enough to be hosting a lot of mega events in the regions and nations now, whether it's Beyonce on or Pink or whoever, when we've got 50,000 people in the city centre, those we've got now wardens on the street as well to help people, vulnerable groups, get home safely. That is a model that will have such value, whether that's about role modelling for women being safe in city centres and other marginal groups, and also for older people at these events too, I've got to say, in terms of accessibility and people with disability, but also in terms of thinking about what's the added value to the NHS, what's the added value to the police. You know, it's huge, and how we go about measuring that, and also picking out what works from Devo. That is something that clearly works. So why aren't we pollinating those policies around the whole of the UK?
Brilliant, thank you. Could we pass, let's take one more question, and then we'll get, yeah, gentleman just behind you for ease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin Dyson, thank you very much for everybody from the panel for your contributions. Katy, something you said about policy making being so important. Is there something that there is a barrier with our economic model that means that these policies aren't actually getting through into practice? Because I hear even Darren talking about things you were doing in 2012, and I just keep getting the question, so why isn't it changing? Do we need a different economic model for this to work? You've actually just talked about a few things that are understanding the value of things and having a different model of value so that these policies can go beyond the political cycle of 4 years.
The economy. Darren, do you want to start with that? I know it was directed at Katy, but just we'll bring Katy in as well and Shanaz, and then we better wrap.
I mean, there are people who are more expert in this than me in this room, but, you know, if GDP is the only model that we value, and we don't value a happiness model or a life satisfaction model, I would argue there's an answer to your question there.
Yeah, I mean, the value of culture does not begin and end at the economic, but if you try saying that at the Treasury campus in Darlington, I think that the Levelling Up white paper, I know we have the author in the room, is really helpful on lots of fronts. I think one real opportunity in that for policy making is that when you look to pride in place and civic identity, it doesn't actually have very clear metrics, and I think that's appropriate because those metrics should be co-created with our communities and they'll all be very different, but that process hasn't really happened yet. So in terms of measuring up to level up through policy making, how do we know where we are in 25 if we don't know where we started or how we're measuring it? Policy making, co-created policy making with lots of different sectors, like everybody in this room is a policy maker. Everyone who's sat there and gone, wouldn't it be good if, right, you're policy making. So how we draw those ideas together through citizens' assemblies and through our creative communities to create change, I think, is the pathway to that, rather than just saying policy happens in a think tank somewhere or in a government.
We are going to have the architect of the Levelling Up agenda talking to the Secretary of State this afternoon, and hopefully this has fertilised Andy's thoughts about some of the things he might ask Lucy Fraser. So let me end by saying, in a real nutshell, because I've slightly run over inevitably, and let's start with Shanaz on this one. What is at the top of your wish list for a political party's manifesto for unlocking the creative industries for an election in the next 18 months?
What's the top of my wish list? I think it goes to kind of really understanding the power and potential of it. Put your money where your mouth is what we've been talking about a little bit, isn't it? About value and kind of what we value and what we don't value, and recognise that it is what we lead in. We are world leading in this, and actually invest in the future, invest in the future generations, and take some calculated risks with that. That's on my wish list.
Thank you. Katy, what would you like to see political parties consider putting in their manifestos about the creative industries?
I think with the cultural and creative industries, my call is effectively Avengers Assemble, because we need those unlikely allies to come together around loads of these opportunities and challenges. And that's the only way I think any party is actually going to drive through change, by bringing together cross-sector groups. And through doing that, actually, they're also getting massive efficiencies of resource and knowledge transfer. So I'd just say, yeah, let's get the unlikely allies around the table for the first time.
Darren?
Surely there is no greater reason for investing public money than creating happier lives.
Yeah, Hear, hear. What a great way to end. Happiness. Thank you so much. That is all we've got time for from this panel. Thank you for some great questions. Thank you for your thought-provoking discussions. The festival continues. Please feel free to go and explore the rest of the house, spot the people in the teal T-shirts. They'll direct you wherever you want to go. You could just get yourself at the front of the queue in the vaults for lunch if you want to at this point. I'm going to be back in the great room here at 1:50. We're going to be going, oh, this is going to be so much fun. We are going behind the scenes of Wild Isles. I imagine, like me, you've devoured it. And we've got the series producer, Hilary Jeffkins, who will talk about how a lemon drizzle cake got David Attenborough on board. See you then. Thank you so much.